Hello, everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. A crescent moon smiled down on the small village below. Its long, silvery streams of ethereal light were captured by the gossamer fog, which hung heavy in the low places of the community. Here in the early hours of the morning, all manner of nocturnal creatures stalked, scurried, and slinked. Over hills and under houses, they prowled, but none with evil intent, none that acted against nature. That is, save one, a thing of nightmares which moved with the silence of a shadow. In life it had been a man, but now it was a twisted mockery of humanity. Its flesh, if it could be called flesh, was as white as ivory and cold as December stone. The creature's thin, cruel lips were a dark scarlet, and behind them hid white, razor-sharp teeth. When it was a living man, he loved and laughed. Now, as an abomination of undeath, it knew only hatred and jealousy of the living. That and its unholy hunger for blood. Its unshod feet, with talon-like nails, never touched the ground, but rather floated a few inches above it. The fiend glided with all the likeness of a balloon, being pulled along on a string through the backyards and alleys. As it passed by a church and through the stretching shadow cast by the crucifix affixed to the top of its steeple, the creature's movement slowed a little, like moving through thick mud. But it was not stopped entirely. The faith of this world was on its deathbed, and as such, so too was its power to ward off the wretched spawn that now haunted the village. Once beyond the church, the undead fixed its attention on the house at the end of the street. It was a quaint little house with blue vinyl siding, white trim, and a well-manicured lawn. On either side of the front porch were bushes that hosted a spectacular array of red roses. Perhaps as little as 100 years ago, they would have served as a protection against the creature that drew nearer to the front door. But now, most of the people have forgotten the old ways, and too few of those who did know of them believed in them. And without belief, there is no protection. Not for a single moment did it hesitate at the front door, but passed through it as easily as steam through a grate. Up the stairs it glided without effort. A mother and father slept in the master bedroom, but the creature would not be visiting them tonight. Tender is the flesh of a child, and sweet is the blood of the innocent. Sweeter still are the tears of a grieving mother, who would serve as its sustenance after the boy was limp and cold. The child couldn't find sleep that night, but could only toss and turn in his bed. Strange and terrifying dreams kept waking him, and he could not rid himself of the anxiety they brought. Much earlier that evening, after a particularly fitful dream, the boy ran to his parents' room, and he asked to sleep with them. His mom climbed out of bed and hugged the child and said a few words of comfort to him. His dad sat up on the side of the bed, took both of his son's hands in his own and said, "Son, you're getting to be a big boy now. Your mom and I love you very much, and if you want to sleep in here, of course you can. But I think you're a pretty brave little guy, and you aren't going to let some bad dreams scare you into having to put up with your mother's snoring." His mom playfully slapped her husband's leg to feign offense. He chuckled at his parents' antics, and he felt a little more at ease. He nodded at his father with a renewed resolve to sleep in his own room that night. Before he turned to leave, his father continued, "You don't have anything to be afraid of, pal. Monsters aren't real, and what isn't real can't hurt us." He returned to his room alone, and his parents returned to bed. That had been many hours before the wretched thing invaded their house. It was almost 2 o'clock in the morning when the thing entered the boy's room. The child's eyes fell on it at once. He wanted to scream louder than ever before. But all his body provided him with was a choked gasp. He could not see the horror clearly, but there in the doorway he could distinguish its unnatural shape, and he could see its awful eyes. They were like two tiny blue flames that flickered in the back of deep, hollow sockets. Knowing it was seen by the child, it drew in on him slowly, slowly. It could taste the boy's fear just as one might taste salt in the air when nearing an ocean. Its lips stretched into a malicious smile, and the boy shook his head in vigorous denial of the terror that was inching closer and closer. Like dark tendrils, every shadow in the small room seemed to stretch and grow until the child was completely encapsulated in an unnatural darkness that held him in place. The boy closed his eyes tight, tighter than he had ever closed them in his 7 years of life. So tight that it made his face hurt. So tight that he could see little shapes of colored lights dance beneath his eyelids. Monsters aren't real. Monsters aren't real. He repeated his father's words over and over again to himself, but to no avail. He did not, he could not, believe the words that came out of his mouth. His father was wrong. The thing was without question in the room with him. He could feel its very presence, the burning cold that radiated from its form, and he could smell it. It was a smell that reminded him of the dead possum he and his parents passed on the road in the car a few days earlier. Only worse, much, much worse. And as the damp cold became more bitter and the stench grew heavier in the air, there was no doubting that thing was coming for him. The boy, eyes still clenched shut, hugged himself and rocked back and forth on his bed. None of these measures served to soothe him, however, not in his time of impending doom. A new anxiety gripped him when he heard an unearthly, chittering laughter come first from one corner of the room, then from under the bed, then from another corner. The boy clapped his hands to his ears, but the laughter persisted just as loud as though he had done nothing at all. Tears streamed from the child's face when he heard the laughter move from one place to another, faster and faster, until it was all around him, all at once. It was not through any desire of his own, but rather as if his body acted under its own accord when the boy's eyes snapped open. The laughter stopped, almost as suddenly as if it had never been there, and all was silent. The boy looked to his left and right in a frantic panic, but he saw nothing. However, the room was still deathly cold, and the malodorous reek of decay still hung heavy in the air. He lifted his chin and tilted his head back to observe the ceiling. There he saw it in all of its horror. Floating only a few feet above him was the fiend, and the boy looked directly into its abhorrent face. He saw clearly its chalk-white skin with sunken cheeks and glowing eyes. The fiend's blood-red mouth was agape, and its purple tongue lolled. Now, at the acme of the child's trepidation, when he was in full paroxysm, it was the time for the horror to strike and to slake its terrible thirst. It clutched for the child with both of its gnarled, claw-tipped hands. But with one swift motion, the boy effortlessly performed the last resort that was left to him. Before the ghastly shade could grab the boy, it was all at once blinded by an intense white light. The creature shrieked and faltered upwards, away from the boy. It drew both arms to its chest. They were burned up to the elbows as if the wretch had instead been a mortal man who foolishly thrust them into a raging fire. The creature, still blinded by the damnable light that filled the room, howled out in pain and anguish. Wounded and more than a little dejected, it vanished from the boy's room. From times old to the present day, there has always been a firmly held belief among children. It is a belief that is neither taught nor handed down from one generation to the next. It is simply known in their hearts. As if by instinct, every child knows that they are safe from monsters when they hide from them beneath a blanket.